That's anise or anise, however you want to say it. When we used to chum bait fish, we would put some anise in our bait fish chum.
I was looking all over my list for anise.
Yes, I thought I wrote it on.
And it wasn't on there, I was like...
Did I put it on there? I thought I put it on the one where I wrote down here. Did I miss not putting that on there?
You didn't, but I did write anise.
Okay,
so.
well, Justin
wins.
Justin. All right, this one was the one he was talking about that looks similar. The wood looks similar to the monkey pod, right? This is mimosa.
Mimosa.
Mimosa. It really does? It's a... Get me wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's alternate bipinnately compound. Is that the
bipinnately compound? Which means if you look and find the bud on the tree, what comes out from the bud is this. This is a leaf, and these tiny things are the leaflets. So a compound leaf would look like this. You're going to have one long stem with a bunch of leaflets coming off of it. Bipinnately compound means it's got one big stem, smaller stems coming off of that, and then the leaflets come off of that. So it's twice compounded. It's bipinnately compound.
Big words. And then you got your sea grape, which are edible, but they're not very good. The sea grape, Coca loba uvifera. These are they grow in coastal areas. They're
only in Florida.
They're good for you know, like holding the shore together, and you can't cut them unless you want to pay a fine. And
do they have a fruit that looks like a grape?
They got a grape, and if you eat too many of them, it'll kind of rub the skin off your tongue, and they're edible, but just not real good.
Well, that sounds like something I want to experience.
This is another one that grows south of us mainly. Nonia glabra, I think, is pond apple. They sometimes call it alligator pear. But if you run your finger down the midrib, it's got a pretty sharp midrib.
I know how you're doing.
You know, it's
Find these on your list.
you know, it's entire, it's alternate. The midrib is pretty indicative. This is actually my favorite fruit, but I'm allergic to the sap of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong. This is related to pawpaw, isn't it?
I don't know.
Well,
it's Nonia glabra.
If y'all are familiar with pawpaw, they're in the same family. They're relatives. I think is that right? Is the mango in there?
This is mango here.
Okay, yeah, that's mango.
This is mango, and this is like the sap on this will make me break out worse than anybody who has ever had poison ivy. And poison ivy doesn't affect me, but this is a mango tree, and we've been grafting some and growing some. And anyway, that's a mango. This is black cherry. Most of you know that one. Where'd he go? Anyway, black cherry.
Simple leaves, serrated margins, and fuzzy little orange hairs at the base on the underside of the midrib, usually.
Yep.
They tend to fall off early in the season, though.
And this is wax myrtle, Myrica cerifera, and a lot of times you want to keep, they use this as ornamental sometimes. It also grows in the swamps native around where I live. It's serrated up near the tip. It'll have these little waxy seeds. You can make candles out of the wax from them. And they'll keep bugs away from areas. So a lot of times people will plant them near the entrance of their house, keep fleas and other things away from their door. And then we've got, I didn't count the needles, but should be the same thing as what Jake has growing here, loblolly pine. And 3 needles per fascicle, relatively short needles, small twigs, small short fascicle. Sucker. Loblolly pine, lots of cones, and they're going to be sharper than some of these others.
One thing I'll add, usually this is going to have 3 needles per fascicle, like you mentioned. Slash pine, if you get a real healthy, fertile loblolly pine, they can look similar to slash pine. Loblolly pine will typically have twisted needles. Slash pine has untwisted needles, or straight. So if you get a slash pine that's got 3 needles per fascicle, it usually has 2. If you get one that has 3, you can tell them apart by whether or not the needles are twisted.
And then this one looks like a conifer. It's not a conifer. Ian would probably get this one right off the bat. This is Australian pine. Really dense wood. I had a little slab of it down there. It's considered invasive. If you've ever been to beaches in Florida and you walk out there and step on things that feel like sweet gum balls, it's the seeds from these things. I like the wood. It's super dense, but this one I was surprised the sample held up very well, because usually the leaves will curl and fall off, but I had them in ice since Tuesday or Wednesday. Common persimmon, Diospirus or Diospirus virginiana, and that's your common persimmon. A lot of you know that. Robert saw some big ones.
Is that the same persimmon that Mr. Tom took me in the swamp and
I'm
the rotted fruit and just, or it was near, it wasn't
you
rotted.
have to get it near rotted
Yeah.
before it fully sweetens and the mouth-furring compounds will
That's kind of
exit the fruit.
you can call it hazing or indoctrination. You know, like when I'm teaching dendro and I'm walking the kids through the woods, the new kid always gets to bite into one that's not, and it'll make your
Not
tongue
fully
feel
ripe.
like you're growing hair on it. It's really accurate.
Like a toothache tree?
Rule of thumb is that after the first frost. However, it actually doesn't have anything to do with the frost. They just happen to generally coincide. So you can get sweet persimmon fruits before the first frost. The skin's going to be wrinkled though by the time they're actually good to eat.
I remember that this looked like something I would never consider eating. And I remember Tom picking it and just, it was like he was having a worldly experience of some sort, that when he was eating, it just,
Well,
He
Dio
wants-
spirals,
no.
I tell the kids it's fruit of the gods. I don't, you know, Dio, I don't know what the rest of the Latin is. I
Same
didn't
genus
take that
as
class.
ebony. It is, all ebonies are from the same genus. They're tropical. Rarely will you ever see heartwood in a persimmon, but if you do, it's black. So there's one more species that grows
Wow.
in Texas called Texas ebony, and it's a much smaller tree, but occasionally it will produce a significant percentage of that black heartwood. So hard and dense wood though.
This is your water oak. It's one of your lesser quality red oaks. We saw quite a bit of it into slabs and various things, and you know, you get a big one and quarter saw it, it's pretty, but it's got spatulate or paddle shaped leaves, and grows pretty fast, lives 30 to 50 years, gets diseased and falls on your house.
what word did you, spatula?
Spatulate, like a paddle.
Like a like a
Shaped
spatula?
Like a spatula.
Okay.
Or I always think of it as the water oak.
So,
But they can be highly variable. Lots of weird leaf forms.
and this, and this one I didn't even know grew. I didn't know where. I've driven past this tree for 20 years and didn't know I had them. You know, close to where I live, and I went to get another sand pine, and there was a skate park right there. And like, there's a park? That's a white oak, you know, Quercus alba, and I didn't know they were there, and they were this big around, so they've been there for a while. But you know, y'all get a lot of these up there. They're rare birds where I live.
And I'm not 100% certain that this isn't a species called bluff oak or bluff white oak, which has a much smaller lobe. I need to see the seeds to know for sure.
These were low on the tree, though. I couldn't get up to where they were supposed to be.
It may just be shade leaves, though. One of the complications of dendrology is that a lot of times the leaves from the top of the tree are considered your typical leaves, and they're the ones they'll show you in the leaf book, but you can't reach them. And what you get are the shade leaves. The leaves that are, they often take on a different form because they have to be to capture as much sunlight as possible. They'll be thinner. The lobes will not be as deep. If you see a normal white oak, you can imagine it's like a finger-like lobe, real deep lobed. But a lot of these, if these are shade leaves, then that may explain the unusual form where they're very shallow. But red oaks too will have really different leaves in the shade than they do in the sun.
Yeah, and that's what.
And the odd thing is, every book considers the sun leaf to be the typical form, and so you got to just figure out on your own what the shade leaves look like because you don't see them in the books. It's not a.
We had a
it's
young
atypical.
guy doing the state forestry contest dendro last year, and he was like getting tricky stuff. I'm like, come on, dude, you've got the coastline that goes from Panama City to Key West, and this guy's trying to play tricks. And you know, I try to get stuff that's representative. This one, a lot of you probably would say looked like a scarlet oak. It's Schumart oak. Very similar. Danny told me how to tell them apart, you know, when I asked him, but Quercus schumartii. He was telling me by looking at acorns, there may be other ways also.
There are other ways, and then really to know for certain, you'd have to look at the acorns. Scarlet oak's going to tend to have concentric rings around the tip. Schumart oak, though, tends to have this tip of the lobe tends to widen out towards the tip, whereas you don't see that as much near scarlet oak, but it's not deterministic. It's really the acorns that separate the two.
And this one, let me make sure I'm right before I tell you.
It's camphor.
Yep, that's camphor. Yeah, that's camphor. That's kind of an invasive tree. It makes some pretty cool wood sometimes, but
It smells like Vicks Vapor Rub. Or Cedar Man swears it smells like sassafras. I think it smells like Vicks.
Do you remember many years ago when I was collecting the 6x6 squares to go on my wood bowl, who was on the farm back then,
Wood bowl, yeah.
sent me a box of his, and when I opened it up, I went, whoa!
And this was another one I didn't climb the tree to get, so it came from low on the tree. Much more common up here than in my area. Southern red oak.
More commonly, what you're going to see on a sun leaf, on a typical leaf, I can't even pull it off for sure.
Bell, they're new growth, yeah.
But yeah, you'll see a bell shape on the base of it, rather than this taper. It's not very pronounced because this is a shade leaf or a juvenile leaf, and those are just not going to have the typical form, but you do often have almost like a turkey-footed leaf. It's going to have like a long central lobe and then some lobes out to the side. In the sun, it can have more lobes, but in the sun, you're going to see the more pronounced bell shape at the base, and that's really diagnostic for southern red oak.
They'll be red and pubescent on the back. That means fuzzy, like my chin.
Very hairy.
Pubescent?
On the side. Pubescent, yes.
That's a good word.
All right, this one was a double. We've got a smaller leaf one over there. Morris rubra or red mulberry. Kind of a heart-shaped cordate leaf. Sometimes it'll get a glove or mitt shaped. It's serrated and alternate. Girl and boy trees. So the girl trees are the ones that have the berries that taste good. And there you go. You can probably tell more about it. But
Boy tree spruce pollen. Honestly, the thing that people confuse this the most with is basswood, which is completely unrelated. But I thought he was trying to sneak a basswood in, which you don't see very commonly in Florida. It does grow there, pretty rare. But that's the only other tree that really has a similar leaf shape. With basswood, you'll never see those lobed leaves like the mitten or the three-lobed leaf like the sassafras. So.
number 18 is gonna be a turkey oak, and notice it's got a short petiole as compared to the Shumard oak, which got a long petiole. That's the leaf stem, and it's another one of your red oaks. It's a thick leathery leaf, grows on high upland sites like your longleaf pines would. You'll find these like longleaf pine, turkey oak, wiregrass all growing together, and they've got points. Red oaks have your points. Typically your white oaks are going to be round and short petioles, and these are really good for smoking wood on. I've never cut one into boards, but a lot of people.
Turkey oak is in the white oak family.
It's
a red oak.
It's a red oak. It's almost it almost has no leaf stem. So they look pretty similar to your shade variety of the southern red oak. When the southern red oak grows in the sun, it'll get a longer leaf stem, easy to tell apart. But these have maybe a ½ inch leaf stem, and this is almost an 1/8 of an inch. So tiny, tiny little leaf stem on a turkey oak. When you see the tree, it's really obvious because, like he says, it's a scrub oak. They grow in sand hills. They're trash trees, and really not good for lumber, but people like to smoke with them.
Yeah. And this one, some of you say, man, that looks kind of like a pecan. Well, it's the same genus, all right? Caria aquatica, yeah, I've got it. And this is a water hickory, all right? So, and actually, there's gators underneath this tree just about every time I go to get this sample. But it's 9 to 13 leaflets. It's compound leaf, usually 9 to 13 leaflets on it, and the leaf kind of resembles a pecan, and bark's a little different than the pecans, but.
Alligator. You see
Yeah,
an
I mean,
alligator
well,
under a hickory tree.
I went through one bank. I went from like here to the porch when I got the bald cypress, the green ash, and a couple of others, and I saw 5 gators. So, where are we at now?
Let's see, water hickory should be 20 next, right here.
20. All right, this one. There's swamp red bay and red bay, and I can't tell them apart. I don't know this. I'm going to call it red bay, and if I'm wrong, Justin can correct me.
You can't tell them apart except whether you're standing in a swamp or standing on a sandhill. That's how you tell them apart.
What is it?
It's
red
called
bay,
red
like
bay.
your bay leaves you use for cooking. That's your bay leaves. I like to eat them, except for when they have scale on them. And if you're making chicken and rice and it's not right, it's because you didn't put enough of these in there.
That's a bay leaf. And also, Persea bourbonia, that's the scientific name for that. Persea americana is a scientific name for an avocado. So that's actually close relative of an avocado. The fruit looks like a tiny miniature avocado, but it's the size of, I don't know, a holly berry. It's tiny. and blue.
It's kind of elongated too, like a
Yeah.
swamp tupelo. But yeah, there's the red bay ambrosia beetle, which is an invasive species, is smashing these things and
Yeah.
clogging up the xylem and it's killing them. And so
They
you
used
see
to
'em-
use it as a cabinet wood, like these fancy ships. If they build them in the South, the trim wood would be out of red bay because it's like a cherry or mahogany colored wood. Beautiful stuff, but you don't see the big ones anymore. They're all getting killed.
Made some crane mats out of it, though.
Have you? For shame.
Man, I wish I
For
could
shame.
find something big enough to saw.
Prettiest crane mats you ever saw.
And this is sugarberry.
I dressed it on the outside with the red oak and the white oak.
Sugarberry, it looks a lot like the hackberry that some of you see. And
It's related to an elm. If you ever saw the logs, you'll see the ulmiform late wood. If you ever see that wavy form on the flat sawn elm, it's called ulmiform pores in the late wood. Well, this is in the hackberry,
Spanish
or the
moss.
elm
Yes, sir.
family. It'll have the same pattern on the wood.
yeah, a lot of times these, I hope I don't offend anybody, they'll have Kentucky teeth. You know, they're sometimes there and sometimes missing. You know, sometimes they're entire, sometimes they get teeth. So
In
sometimes
Kentucky, they
they're-
call them Florida teeth.
Right. But and most of you know this one, sycamore, Planus occidentalis, and
Big tree, grows in the swamps, beautiful to quarter saw. We've done that a few times, Jake.
Well, we were planning on doing some today.
Yeah.
Or actually yesterday. But it's not we're doing it today, but the cypress come in and kind of interrupted the schedule.
Fairly, I'd say.
all right, then we've got a sand pine, grows on scrub, you know, sandy areas where your clay is probably 9 or 12 feet or further from the surface. Same place turkey oaks and wiregrass grow. It's 2-needle pine, short needle. The one that's tough when you're just looking at trees for me to determine, or when you're looking at leaf samples, is your spruce pine. They're very similar leaf samples. Trees are totally different. They'll use this for knotty pine siding or pulp, but that's
Its closest relative is Virginia pine. So if you're up in the mountains, you'll see Virginia pine.
That would
That's
be in the southern yellow pine family, though.
But neither of them are southern yellow pines. Both of those are more closely related to lodgepole and ponderosa pine. So they're more like a western yellow pine. You cannot sell it as a southern yellow pine.
if I'm not wrong, I may be wrong, but longleaf slash loblolly and shortleaf are your southern yellow pine.
Right.
There's not 7?
There are only 4 that can be sold as a southern yellow pine.
Okay. What's Virginia?
Virginia is, it really doesn't have a group, but if it were to be in a group, it would be considered a western yellow pine with lodgepole and ponderosa.
Okay.
That's its closest relatives.
And this is southern red cedar. It's some people consider it the same species as eastern red cedar. Some consider it a subspecies. I can't tell the difference.
Nobody can tell the difference.
But southern red cedar, Juniperus silicicola or Juniperus virginiana, depending.
You know that's not eastern red cedar.
I don't. It could be Juniperus virginiana. You can call it what you want to. It's not going to hurt my feelings.
No, I mean, I'm not trying to be a smart ass.
No,
I know normally I am.
I don't know, Jake. I can't tell you the difference.
I don't recognize the difference.
Well, I mean, you said you can't tell the difference. Well, how the hell do you know that was different? You know?
I knew where you got it from. Yeah.
And this is a, I got that out of my front yard, so it probably wasn't from, anyway. Magnolia Virginia, Magnolia grandiflora, yeah, big flowers, yeah. So that's your southern magnolia. This is probably a variety Little Jim based on the size of the leaves, which they use for ornamentals. But they're blooming right now down where we are. I don't know if they're blooming up
They're
there
blooming
yet.
in Athens. We have them blooming.
And this one, this is a cool tree, grows in the swamps near my house. Serrated leaves near the tip. They're small serrations. I've got to feel them sometimes because my eyes are so bad, but it's a loblolly bay. I've got to get my bays right before I screw up. But that's, and it's got a pretty prominent midrib too, not as much as that pond apple, but if you start feeling them, and like when the kids think they're good at dendro, I'll have them close their eyes and make them do a multiple choice of 3 or 4, and you know, and then they get to use something other than eyesight.
What happens if you throw that one in soup?
I
I
don't
wouldn't
know.
recommend it.
No.
But I'll tell
Okay.
you what, bugs like it because you don't find leaves that aren't chewed up. I mean, very seldom.
If you're
And
making
then
a soup for bugs, highly recommended.
27.
Stick to red bay then.
Magnolias, and when the wind's blowing, you can see those silver leaves shining from a half mile away. Sweet bay, Magnolia virginiana, Sweet Bay magnolia, and I don't know, we've got a lot of those growing in the swamps near us. And then,
Same size blooms on the Sweet Bay magnolia?
Much smaller.
yeah,
Maybe
they're
a
small.
quarter of the size.
Same other one?
Yeah, the Loblolly
But they look
Bay
similar.
and the Sweet Bay have similar sized white flowers.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you got over here, Magic Man's favorite tree, you know, palmate, alternate, serrated, Sweet Bay,
Sweet gum.
sweet gum, liquid ambar, Steraciiflua. And then this one has got some really spiral grain. I've never sawed it, but
I have.
I've cut it down.
It's gorgeous, but it dries like it splits apart, micro fissures all through it.
Have
Hard to
any of
dry.
you cooked on this? 'Cause I cook a lot on black cherry.
So this is laurel cherry, Carolina laurel cherry.
Prunus carolina. It's got
Fresh out the
That's
leaves,
good. I
they'll
don't
smell
wanna
like
come out.
maraschino cherries.
oh, it's got Kentucky teeth too.
Here, smell the leaf.
It smells like cherry cola.
You smell it?
Yeah.
It smells like, to me, it smells like a jar of maraschino cherries. They're evergreen, so it's a cherry, but it's evergreen. Don't eat these cherries.
Cyanide.
Yeah, they're not good for you. If anybody wants to crush up a leaf and smell it, you can smell that real fragrant leaf.
Yeah,
Every time I
John.
walk by one of those, I have to crush a leaf and smell it.
Yeah, John and his son cut down a tree out a couple of weeks ago and dropped it. Hey, I dropped that off in your pasture. I'm like, get Annie the cow out of there, put her in the other pasture because they're they can have cyanide in them. But this was a double. That's your red mulberry again. They're just smaller leaves, so they can be quite variable. This one is an ornamental tree. They just got through blooming. They'll have purple flowers, yellow flowers. This is Tababuia.
Well, I guessed on that, and I guessed right.
It's compound opposite, and you know, most time you think compound opposite, you're thinking ash. This is Tababuia. If you saw that Ipe wood that came from the Thunder Mountain Railroad, the real dense Brazilian walnut, that's what this tree comes. Yeah, that's what comes out of this tree. And I've sawed it a couple of times, and it didn't look like that, but it's sawed a lot easier green than it does after it's been Thunder Mountain Railroad for 20 years.
Wonder why.
Well, 30 cuts, change a blade. I think this is green ash.
You
Some kind of ash.
it's ash. It's really hard to tell without the seeds. Honestly, ashes can be really difficult to tell apart unless you have either the tree in front of you or the seeds. If you got it from around here, I'd say it's probably green ash. If you got it from further south, I'd say Carolina ash. But
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's Carolina. Carolina more on the tree. I've been getting samples from it for years, and these leaves are more.
So you don't have the blade,
they're more something.
so
It's
you don't have the borer feeling the ash.
Carolina ash, y'all all know what probably an
have
ash
many
seed looks
ash,
like.
honestly.
It's almost like a maple seed. It's a wing samara, but on a Carolina ash, it's a lot
got
much
some
wider wing on it
Big ash
than on your
logs,
other
too.
ashes.
Not long, but wide.
Well, they're about as long as an ash seed, but the wing is about an inch wide. It's really wild looking, and they can be like bright pink. So you'll see, you'll be driving through and see these scrubby little trees growing in standing water with a big flared base, just like a tupelo tree. They got these pink things up. That's the seeds from a Carolina ash.
I think I may have
Weird
screwed-
looking tree.
I think I may have screwed up on that one. That feels like new growth on live.
It's
oak
not.
to me.
White ash is an upland tree. They're in the same genus, but Carolina ash literally it'll grow in standing water, the big flared trunk like a tupelo.
I think that's new growth on live oak. Is that what you?
If you have the seed, you can tell them apart because the seed part, where the actual nutrients are stored on a green ash, takes up half the wing. It takes up maybe a quarter inch on the tip of a white ash. That's how I tell them apart. You can tell them apart by the bark to some extent, but you have to.
By us, we haven't seen the seed in 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I screwed up on this one. I think that's new growth on a live oak. But
You think that's a live
I think it is.
I think that's a laurel oak.
Okay, well, that's what I grabbed it as, but I think it's new.
No, I think that's laurel.
Okay, well, that's what I wrote, but I'm about second guessing myself.
No, I think you're right. I think that's
Okay.
laurel. It's laurel.
All right.
It will be today.
Yeah.
Well, laurel oak's usually more lanceate than this. It's new growth, and it's
Yeah.
generally the same texture as a water oak. And
Those kind of real sharpened
Yeah.
lobes are real typical of the young growth on
So-
a laurel oak.
laurel oak. So we'll call that laurel oak, Quercus laurifolia. This one is tough for a lot of people, and you start looking at the buds and the veins and the tip, and You know, a lot of these serrated leaves give folks trouble. This one's got 100 different common names probably. It's called blue beech, musclewood, American hornbeam is what it is on the paper there. Carpinus caroliniana.
Well, something we have.
And they used to make tool handles and so forth out of it. It's got zero rot resistance.
The way the leaf was meeting, I thought it was an elm of some sort.
Yeah,
It looks a lot like an elm. It's actually in the birch family, though.
it's kind of doubly
We
serrated.
identified all the oaks, but we had no idea which one to give.
Yeah.
It's kind of doubly serrated. It's got big teeth and some small teeth in between. If you feel the trunk, that's real easy to identify because it feels like muscle striations. And
It's heavy, dense.
it's very dense.
Yep.
And
Did you say zero rot resistance?
yeah, I mean, this stuff rots like in 30 seconds, but it makes great tool handles.
I actually stood the trunk up. I cut it fresh, brought it to my shop, and stood it up in my shop because I was going to haul it home. As when I lived in Mississippi, to go haul it home and saw it on the sawmill. Standing up with the bark on it, it rotted in my shop. It was unbelievable. It's like just the water inside the wood was able to rot it. There's no rot resistance to them. Yeah.
And then we get the one Jake's been sawing all weekend, your taxodium to stitch them, bald cypress. And this, you know, this is kind of cool because they're a deciduous conifer. You know, they're one of the few deciduous conifers. I mean, their leaves fall off in the wintertime. And the
We have
leaves on this,
tamarack.
they kind of look
It's
feather-like.
our version of tamarack.
The leaves lie down flat in your hand. And we get another one called a pond cypress, and they're more spirally. And the wood's pretty much the same though. These typically grow along flowing water. Your pond apples grow in domes and in pond areas. You know, that's why I call them pine cypress. This one right here in front of Mike, that's I don't know what number it is, but that's a slash pine.
36.
Pinus elliottii. Looks like it got some needle cast on it, but it's and two slash
that
3
if I get in
needles.
the way.
Yeah, we get a South Florida slash that has a sometimes they'll have a grass stage. Your North Florida slash or northern slash, their needles are shorter. They don't typically have a grass stage. 2 and 3 needles, and they're very similar to both. They're one of your southern yellow pines, and you have a fascicle that's a little longer than a loblolly typically, and shorter than the woolly long fascicles of a longleaf pine. All right, and we saw a good bit of these.
Beautiful lumber.
Next, and you probably saw some of these driving in here from the road out there. All right, longleaf pine. You know, long woolly fascicles, 3 needles per fascicle. Occasionally you'll see 4, but mainly 3. Huge twigs. The needles grow at the end of the twig.
The father of Cousin It.
Yeah, and these things were like
Remember Cousin It on the Munsters?
you know, the turpentine industry. Those were huge for that, and
Yes, you're right.
they have a grass stage. They'll stay in a grass stage from 3 to 7 years, and then go to the rocket stage. And they're, if you're growing pines for wildlife, those are probably your best. But Justin can probably tell you a whole lot more about longleaf than I can.
I mean, I probably could, but you covered it.
I like them. I mean, and they're cool. You can see them when you're driving down the road from a mile away once you get accustomed to what they look like. Quercus virginiana, your live oak. Yeah. Entire revolute. Revolute means leaves curl. All right. And there's a subspecies of these called like a
curl
scrub
down.
live oak, and they're more brown on the back. These are typically gray. I think of them like live oak lifeboat. They look like they would float. So.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
We got a couple
Oh,
of
I
tiny
skipped
ones.
2. I skipped 2. Yeah, this one I got out of Jake's yard. Simple opposite. All the veins go to tip. Flowering dogwood.
You know I planted that from my mother's memory, right?
I just took a little sample. I noticed you bought it. It had a tag on it from a nursery.
Actually, my sister sent it
There's
from
actually
Arkansas.
quite a few different species of dogwood. Let me hold that leaf right there.
We get
I
Jamaican
listened to his
dogwood in
bark.
that one. So
And
that's
one
the
thing
only
that
two
they
I
all
know.
have in common is that it's called arcuate venation, where the veins come out from the center and then they curl around towards the tip. I did not. I taught dendrology for 4 years at UGA. And they have this little feature where my kids love to
Let them hang. Yeah.
do a trick where they have silky hairs in the veins. So you can rip a leaf in half and it'll actually float in midair. It's almost like spider threads.
And you can tell by the bark too. You know what the bark is
Sounds like.
rough.
Just, I wish you could see, I've got a pagoda dogwood at my place, and that's a very unique tree, and it's beautiful all the time between the berries and the blooms and the leaves and the color and the shape, and it's just my favorite tree on our place.
My sister actually sent two, but I had a guy hired to cut the grass, and he decided one needed mowed down.
Oh,
And what was this one?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that one's hard to tell. And the best way I told my
There's a bunch
kids,
of logs of it down there.
that's a spruce pine.
Looks
I
dead
don't
to
know,
me.
Pinus glabra, I think. It's been a while, but it's dead. I didn't climb a tree to get live needles. That's the only one within 200 miles of my house that I know of. But when I was teaching this stuff, I'd tell the kids to look at it and sand pine and walk by it at walking speed, and the needles on that one would look more spiraled than your sand pine. But
I can see that.
if you can't see the tree, they're darn hard to tell apart sometimes. So, all right, 46. A lot of you saw this. Danny didn't like this one at all.
Really?
Called it the devil. Compound, alternate, 5 to 7 leaflets, smooth on the back. You know, pig nuts don't have hair. Pinus glabra,
Glabra.
Carpinus glabra, glabrous.
Carria glabra.
I'm sorry, yeah. Carya glabrous or glabrous, smooth. It'd been a. I did that one already too.
Yeah. Second sycamore.
Sorry. You Canadians probably know this shape. That's a Florida maple. It's, I guess, subspecies of your sugar maple.
The difference between this and a red maple is that if you look at the edges, you don't see any of the fine serration, no fine teeth. If you look at a red maple or a silver maple, these edges all along the lobe will have very tiny teeth. So that's how you tell your hard maples from your soft maples.
Is that a normal size leaf?
That is pretty normal for a Florida maple. They're really similar to a sugar maple in every way except just really small.
what about syrup?
We don't get the weather to tap them for syrup.
Okay.
If you grew one of those in a place where you could get the weather,
But
then you
would
could
it
tap 'em.
grow?
I think they would, yeah. I know people in Tennessee who tap sugar maples, and I guarantee you those would grow up there. So
This is a Dahoon holly. They're easier to find when they've got the berries on them. When they don't, they're darn hard to find in our swamps. But this swamp tree, and this is pretty much the only holly we have growing in our local, real close local area. And this one is tricky for a lot of people. It's the first one that we have to get red in the, it's already deteriorating. I'm surprised it held up this well since Wednesday afternoon, but that's your swamp tupelo. Some people call it black gum, but
swamp black gum.
swamp black gum. It's got a Narcissa sylvatica, I believe, is the scientific name on it.
If it's the swamp variety, it'd be variety by flora, right? Is that?
I'm just going on what Florida says it is,
Okay.
but you're probably, I know you're right, but yeah.
Generally speaking, the upland variety, they'll grow uplands or swamps, and the upland variety is the kind of type species, and the lowland, the ones that grows in the swamp, is variety by flora. And what that means is that the berries usually come in pairs on the stems. You can already see the flower stems coming on, and it does have pairs, so this would be variety by flora.
Okay, and that's a silver buttonwood. I thought I had brought a button bush too that has like that round star.
a button bush over.
But there's your silver buttonwood. Oh, we got a
What
few
number
more.
is that silver button?
That's 41.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, then we've got turkey oak again. I'm sorry, I apologize. Indian rubber tree. It's you cut this thing and you see latex coming out of it like white sap. You can take a. This is number
48.
48. You can take a cutting of that, stick it in the ground, and it'll grow. Yeah, I stuck a leaf cutting in the ground like 3 years ago. It's still a leaf, but it's still alive. It didn't grow into a tree. It just grew into it's still a live leaf. This is a button bush. It's the opposite. Grows in our swamps. It's got like a little round, I don't know, if it's flower or fruit or what. It looks kind of like an an asteroid or something. Smells really cool. It smells great. I don't know much about.
It's one of the few trees you'll actually see whorled leaves on, which means 3 or more leaves growing from the same spot. On this one, they're all opposite, which means two leaves growing from one spot. But if you see 3 or more, buttonbush is one of the only trees that does that. Catalpa will also do that.
Yep. So, and this is a Salix nigra black willow, and you'll see these growing in low areas. Typically, you don't want to build your house where you see these. Magic Man sawed some of these that are really nice. We don't ever get them big enough to saw. And sometimes if I get a headache and I'm walking in the woods, I'll just grab a couple of these leaves and chew on them. And evidently, they've got a similar chemical or same chemical as aspirin, and it'll relieve some pain and make your headache go away.
The scientific name is Salix, and salicylic acid is actually aspirin, and that's named for this genus.
And then
That's another camphor.
another camphor. I'm sorry, I doubled up on these too. So another camphor. Smells like Vicks Vapor Rub. So I apologize for the doubles. I was just walking around grabbing stuff.
Still reminds me of wood bowl.
This one I left hints on one twig and not on the other. Almost alata, winged elm. I just think of it having a lot of wings, but it's got the unequal bases.
Doubly
Doubly
serrate, like most elms. Although, unlike most elms, the base of these ones tend to be more symmetrical, whereas in an American elm or a slippery elm, you'd have a highly asymmetrical base. Meaning, the blade would start, and then you'd go up like a 1/4 inch, and the blade will start on the other side.
And the petioles on these are really short too, and the twigs aren't nearly as heavy as like American elm.
What number is that one again?
That was 40 or 53. And now we're to another sweet gum at 54, which is an Asian or Chinese sweet gum. And you can see instead of having 5 points, it's got 3, and it's more bell-shaped at the bottom. A lot of times they'll plant these for like ornamental trees, but other than the leaves, they look just like sweet gum. I think it's more, I don't know if it's invasive as much as ornamental. I mean, it may be invasive some places. This one's like a landscape plant, but a lot of times if they get big enough, you can saw them into boards. And a friend of mine who's a cabinet maker said the best, most beautiful cabinets he ever made was out of this Eupodocarpus. And I just have a couple of them growing at the house as landscape plants. This one is super invasive. It's a compound alternate. Makes really good honey, but it's super invasive and displaces a lot of like red mangroves or coastal plants in Florida, and that's Brazilian pepper. A lot of people are allergic to it, just like poison ivy. It has never bothered me, but it might start today. A lot of you know this. The wood from this is actually pretty cool. It's another one of your, it's bipennate compound also.
Yep.
It's got some really nice scale on it if you want to see some scale insects. But that's your Chinaberry tree.
Which is in the mahogany family. It's one of the few temperate mahogany species.
And then last, this is another invasive Chinese tallow or popcorn tree, and I found this in a swamp, like, I don't know, 1/8 of a mile from my house when I went to get a longleaf pine. So, and these are pretty invasive. But.
Alternate, wide.
Next time you find a seed, try to light it and
All right.
let me know if that was what I recall.
Find out if that's the tallow tree.
They look like stingrays.
Tom showed you.
They're kind of shaped like entire stingrays. But
Like they really fast. Feeder bait. Let it go for 5 years.
So that's all I've got. If you got any questions, Justin's ready to answer. So. Who got 100?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me go. I appreciate the effort, gentlemen. Really.
Yeah. Y'all figure out who gets some prizes.
Jake, you got them all, didn't you? Okay.
I had Sycamore down. I got all the Latin origins.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to lie, let's go with it. That's a good one.